Have you ever felt like the people you love most can betray you when you need them the most? Alice Foster, a 62-year-old mother, spent her entire life giving everything for her family. But when her husband died, her own son, Lucas, chose his wife's birthday over his mother's funeral. "Mom's funeral isn't important, but Megan's birthday only happens once a year," he said. Those words hit Alice like a slap. Her heart shattered as she realized her sacrifice had been taken for granted. But Alice wasn't about to let this betrayal define her. The true test of strength begins now. What will she do when her own flesh and blood turns their back on her? Stay tuned as we uncover the shocking choices Alice makes next. Alice Foster sat alone in the living room, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. At 58, she was a woman of resilience, a mother who had given everything for her family. She'd spent decades raising her son, Lucas, and supporting her husband, David, through thick and thin. She had never asked for much in return, her life a quiet symphony of sacrifice. Every waking moment of hers was dedicated to creating a life that her family could be proud of. David had been her rock, the love of her life, until illness slowly stole him away. She had watched as he fought a long battle against cancer, the years wearing them both down. His death, after months of suffering, left Alice with a heartache too deep to measure. But despite the pain, Alice moved forward. She had always been the strong one, the one who held things together when the world seemed to fall apart. Now, as she stood in her home preparing for his funeral, everything felt like a dream, one she didn't want to wake up from. The smell of fresh flowers, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the rustling of papers on the kitchen table. It was all so ordinary, yet so empty without David's warm presence. Alice felt herself trembling as she adjusted the black dress she would wear for the funeral. Her mind was elsewhere, lost in the memories of their life together. The wedding they'd had in a small church, the laughter around the dinner table during family holidays, the quiet moments when they would sit side by side reading books. She'd cherished it all. Her phone buzzed in her hand and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from Lucas. "Hey, Mom, I've been thinking a lot about Dad's funeral, but I wanted to let you know something. I can't make it today." Alice paused. She read the message again, her heart sinking. "I can't make it today." The words echoed in her mind. Her son, the one person who had always promised her that family came first, her flesh and blood. Before she could process her confusion, another message popped up. "Megan's birthday is today, and we've been planning this for months. It's really important, and we've already booked everything. We're having a big party tonight, and I can't miss it." Alice's breath caught in her throat. Megan's birthday? Her son, the man she had raised, was telling her he couldn't attend his own father's funeral because of a party for his wife? Her fingers trembled as she typed a response. "Lucas, your father's funeral is today. We've been preparing for this for weeks, just like we always do for family." But before she could press send, the phone buzzed again. The next message from Lucas hit her like a slap in the face. "Mom, I know it's hard, but you've got to understand. You're getting older and your time is limited. But Megan's birthday only happens once a year. I can't just cancel everything for her." Alice froze. The words echoed in her mind, ringing louder than the phone itself. "You're getting older. Your time is limited." Her heart felt as though it had cracked open. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but she stayed silent, looking at the screen, her eyes welling with tears. Was this how it was all supposed to end? She had given everything for him. She had sacrificed her own dreams, her own time, her health, everything for this family, and now she was nothing more than an inconvenience. The phone slipped from her fingers, falling softly onto the carpet. Alice looked around the room at the photos of the family they once were. How had it come to this? How had her only son, the boy she had nursed through every illness, the man she had taught to be strong, come to view her as just another burden? Another thing to be pushed aside when something or someone more important came along. The tears she had been holding back fell freely now. She had spent the past several days making arrangements, sorting through all the details of David's funeral, and now this. Lucas, the one person who should have been there for her, wasn't even willing to make the effort. She could barely focus as the thoughts swirled in her head. She remembered the countless nights she had stayed up late, waiting for David to return home from his work, making sure Lucas was ready for school, helping him through every hardship in his life. She had done everything for them, everything, and now this. Alice grabbed the phone, her fingers trembling. She typed a short response to Lucas. "I can't believe this. I hope Megan's birthday makes you happy." She stared at the message for a long moment, her heart aching, before pressing send. She sat back in the chair, staring at the phone in her hand. For a moment, she felt the overwhelming emptiness of her home. David was gone. Lucas had turned his back on her. She was completely alone. The tears continued to fall, but there was something else beneath the pain. A quiet rage, something she had never felt before. A realization that this wasn't just about her being abandoned by her son. It was about all the years she had spent sacrificing herself for others, only to be treated like this. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost time for the funeral, and as much as it broke her, Alice knew something had shifted. She had given her whole life for this family, but now she saw that she had to do something for herself. She couldn't continue to be a doormat. She couldn't keep putting her heart out for people who refused to see it. As Alice stood up from the chair, wiping her face, she knew that this was the moment when everything changed. Alice stood in the middle of the living room, the silence of the house almost suffocating. The walls, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and hollow. Her eyes wandered over the old family photos on the mantelpiece, each one a reminder of a life she had spent giving everything to her family. There was the photo of her wedding day, where David smiled at her with so much love and hope. The picture of Lucas as a little boy, holding her hand while learning to walk. Her heart ached as she stared at these images, realizing that they no longer represented the reality of her life. She had sacrificed so much for them, only to be left feeling discarded and alone. Her mind wandered to the years spent supporting David as he battled cancer, the countless hours spent in hospitals, the endless nights awake with worry. Alice had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together. Even after David's death, she continued to give, organizing the funeral, handling the estate, making sure Lucas was taken care of. But now, as she stood in this empty house, the weight of all her sacrifices seemed too much to bear. Her heart felt heavy, as though it was being crushed under the weight of everything she had given, only to be treated like she meant nothing. Then, as if guided by some unseen hand, Alice's eyes landed on something that she hadn't noticed before, an old envelope tucked into the corner of the bookshelf. She picked it up, recognizing David's handwriting on the front. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, unfolding the letter inside. The words inside took Alice by surprise. It was a letter from David, one she had never seen before. She read the first few lines, her eyes welling with tears. David had written about his love for her, his gratitude for everything she had done for their family. But then, the tone shifted. "I know you've always done everything for us, Alice," the letter began, "but I need to confess something I've never been able to say out loud. I've always felt guilty about how much you've sacrificed for us. There were times when I wanted to help you more, to give you more of myself, but I didn't know how. I didn't have the courage to ask for help, and I didn't want to burden you even more. I saw the pressure building on you, and it hurt me to see you carry everything alone. But I was too weak to change it. I should have been more open with you, but I wasn't." The letter continued, and Alice's heart sank deeper with every word. David had known. He had known how much she had given, how much she had carried for him and for Lucas, but he had never found the words to tell her. The guilt, the unspoken pain, they had been there all along, buried deep within the walls of their home, unnoticed until now. The realization hit Alice like a wave. She had been carrying more than just her own burdens. She had been carrying David's guilt as well. All those years, all those sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the compromises, David had been aware of it, but he had never acknowledged it. And Lucas, her own son, had grown up in that environment, not knowing how to value the woman who had given everything for him. Alice had been invisible in her own family, her sacrifices taken for granted by the very people she loved most. Her hands shook as she placed the letter back on the shelf. The words lingered in the air, a painful reminder of everything she had lost. She had always thought that her sacrifices were seen, that they mattered. But now it seemed like she had been invisible all along. The weight of it all began to sink in. For the first time in her life, Alice allowed herself to feel the full extent of her grief, her anger, and her hurt. She had been the pillar of her family for so long, and now, when she needed them the most, they had turned their backs on her. The emotional toll of caring for her husband, of raising her son, of holding everything together, it was too much to bear. But as the tears streamed down her face, something else started to emerge, a sense of clarity. Alice realized that she didn't have to carry this burden anymore. For the first time, she could see a way forward, a way out of the suffocating grip of guilt and sacrifice. She didn't need to attend David's funeral if it meant staying in a family that had turned its back on her. She didn't need to be the one who gave and gave, only to be left feeling empty. The decision came to her like a floodgate opening. She wasn't going to the funeral, not because she didn't care about David, but because she had finally come to understand her own worth. She had spent too many years living for others, and now it was time for her to live for herself. The thought terrified her, and at the same time filled her with an unfamiliar sense of freedom. It was as though the weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders, and for the first time in years, Alice could breathe. She took a deep breath, standing up straighter, wiping away the tears that still flowed. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. She was done living in the shadow of others' expectations. The choice to stay home, to not attend the funeral, was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She was going to reclaim her power, her voice, and her identity. No longer would she let others dictate her worth. As Alice turned away from the family photos, she knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but it would be hers to walk. And for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. It was a strange feeling, one she hadn't experienced in a long time, but it was a feeling that reminded her that she still had time to live, on her own terms. Alice sat in the dim light of her living room, her fingers tightly gripping the edge of her chair as the weight of her decision settled in. She had spent her entire life devoted to her family, loving her son, providing for her husband, and never once thinking of herself. But Lucas's behavior, his heartless decision to abandon her in her moment of need, had shattered the trust she had placed in him. No longer could she ignore the truth. Her son had betrayed her in ways she hadn't imagined. The anger bubbled within her as she stood up and began pacing around the room. She could still hear Lucas's voice in her mind, the way he justified his absence, how he dismissed her pain with words that stung like 1,000 needles. "Megan's birthday is once a year, Mom, but you've lived a full life." Those words played over and over, and with each repetition, the realization grew clearer. He didn't care. Lucas didn't care about the sacrifices she had made, the years she had spent putting his needs above her own. He cared only about himself. But Alice wasn't going to be the victim anymore. She needed answers. Answers about how deep the betrayal went, how far Lucas had gone to take advantage of her. With a determined breath, Alice walked over to the small desk by the window and pulled open the drawer. Inside, she found the old folder containing her son's bank statements and various documents she had kept over the years. She had never snooped before. She had always trusted Lucas. But now, with a sense of urgency gnawing at her, she flipped open the folder. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the bank records. The numbers danced before her eyes, some of them familiar from years past, others new, unfamiliar, unsettling. But then her gaze stopped on one entry, a large sum transferred from her own account to Lucas's, labeled as a loan. Alice frowned. She knew she had given Lucas money, but what shocked her was the sheer amount. And that wasn't all. There were other transactions, luxurious purchases, designer clothes, expensive gadgets, and the most shocking of all, a luxury vacation to the Caribbean. Her breath caught in her throat as the anger surged within her. Lucas had used the money she had given him to help with his financial struggles to buy things for himself, things that Alice had never been able to afford for herself. She had pinched pennies, lived modestly, and scrimped to make ends meet, yet Lucas had been living a life of excess. Every penny she had sacrificed, every extra hour she had worked, had been for him. But here he was, spending her money on indulgences while she worked to keep the family afloat. The betrayal felt like a slap in the face, a revelation that left her reeling. She had always known Lucas to be a bit careless with money, but this was something entirely different. He had known exactly what he was doing, taking advantage of her kindness and trust. Her hands trembling, Alice slammed the folder shut. This was it. She had been a fool to think that Lucas would ever appreciate her sacrifices. He had taken everything for granted, but Alice had been through too much to let this slide. She had spent too many years nurturing a relationship that had now crumbled beneath the weight of her own sacrifices. No more. No more would she allow him to drain her emotionally and financially. She had to cut ties. Her heart heavy but resolute, Alice made her way to the phone. The number she dialed felt strangely empowering as it rang. It was time to make the change she had been putting off for too long. "Hello, Mr. Thomas. It's Alice Foster," she said firmly when the lawyer picked up. "I need to make some changes to my husband's will." A pause on the other end before he spoke. "Of course, Mrs. Foster. What changes would you like to make?" Alice's voice was steady as she replied, "I want to make sure that Lucas is removed from the will. I no longer want him to be part of the family estate." There was a brief silence. "Are you certain about this, Mrs. Foster? This is a serious decision." "I'm sure," Alice said, the words flowing freely now. "He's taken enough from me. It's time he learns the consequences of his actions." With that, the next steps were set into motion. The lawyer assured Alice that he would begin the process of drafting the new will, ensuring that Lucas would be excluded from the inheritance. She felt a strange sense of relief as the finality of her decision settled over her. Later that evening, Alice sat quietly by the window, watching the fading light of day. She thought back on the years she had spent with David, raising Lucas, trying her best to be the mother they both needed. The life she had built had been rooted in love, but it had also been built on a foundation of sacrifice, a foundation that now felt hollow. As she sat there in the quiet, Alice realized something. For the first time in her life, she wasn't making a decision based on what others wanted, but on what she needed. She had spent decades giving. It was now her turn to take control of her life. The phone buzzed on the table, a reminder of Lucas's last message, the one that had pushed her over the edge. But Alice no longer felt the desire to respond. She didn't need to explain herself to him anymore. Her decisions were hers alone. Alice sat by the window, the soft hum of the city outside barely touching the silence within her home. She had spent the entire day reflecting on her decisions, on the cold reality of the actions she had taken. Her hands still shook slightly from the phone call with her lawyer earlier. Her decision to cut Lucas out of the will had been firm, final. But now, as night descended upon the house, the uncertainty began to creep in again. Just as she settled into her thoughts, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but Alice knew exactly who it was before the first ring had even finished. Megan. Alice hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the screen. She had barely spoken to Megan since the night of the funeral. The woman who had been married to her son, the one who had stood beside him when Alice needed him most. The thought of hearing from her now was like a sting to an open wound. But Alice answered anyway, her voice calm, but tinged with something sharp. "Hello?" There was a long pause before Megan's voice came through, shaky and uncertain. "Hi, Alice. It's Megan. I wanted to apologize. I know things have been difficult, and I'm so sorry about everything." Alice felt a twinge of anger stir within her, but she kept it in check. "What are you sorry for, Megan? For Lucas not showing up for his father's funeral? For the way he treated me?" There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "Yes, Alice, I am sorry, but Lucas is going through a really hard time right now. He's in serious financial trouble. I know he's made mistakes, but he doesn't know how to get out of this mess. He feels like he's drowning in debt, and I think he didn't know how to handle it. He's really ashamed of everything." Alice's grip tightened on the phone. Lucas was in financial trouble? She remembered the luxurious purchases she had found in his bank records, the extravagant trips, the designer items. How could he be in trouble? The very thought seemed absurd to her. "Don't try to make excuses for him, Megan," Alice replied, her voice cold. "He's been reckless with his money for years, and I've supported him through every mistake. But this is different. I gave him everything, and he used it to live a life of luxury while I worked my fingers to the bone. I'm done, Megan. Done." There was a brief silence before Megan spoke again, softer this time. "I know, Alice. I understand how you feel, but please listen. I'm asking for your help, just one last time. If you could lend Lucas the money to get out of his debt, I swear he will make things right. I know it's a lot to ask, but he really wants to change. I think he's finally realized how much he's hurt you." Alice's heart pounded in her chest as she listened to Megan's pleading voice. The words echoed in her ears, mixing with the anger, the hurt, and the confusion that had been building within her for days. Could she really believe any of this? Could she trust Megan, who had stood by and watched as Lucas treated her like this? "I'm sorry, but I can't help him anymore," Alice said, her voice shaking slightly now, but with a firm resolve. "I've done enough, Megan. I've given him everything I had, and it's never been enough. You don't understand what it's like to give so much and get nothing in return." Megan's voice broke, a hint of desperation creeping in. "I do understand, Alice. Please, I know you're hurt, but Lucas is struggling, and he's really sorry for everything. He just doesn't know how to fix it all. Please, can't you at least try to forgive him? For his sake, for mine." Alice closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She wanted to believe Megan, wanted to believe that Lucas truly was sorry, that maybe there was a chance for redemption. But the sting of betrayal was still too fresh, too raw. How could she trust him again after everything he had done? The emotions inside her surged and pulled in different directions. She wanted to help him. She always had, but she knew she couldn't do it anymore. Not without losing herself in the process. She couldn't be the only one trying anymore. For once, she needed to be the one who was taken care of. "Megan," Alice said slowly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "I've spent my life trying to fix things for everyone else. I've spent my life giving, but I'm done being the one who always sacrifices. I can't do it anymore." There was another long silence on the other end of the phone before Megan spoke again, quieter this time. "I understand, Alice. I'm really sorry. I thought you might still want to help him." "I'm sorry too, Megan, but I can't." Alice paused, her eyes glancing toward the family photos on the mantel. This wasn't the family she had fought for. This wasn't the love she had built her life around. "Goodbye, Megan." She hung up before the woman could respond, a strange sense of finality hanging in the air. Alice sat back in her chair, staring at the phone in her hands. A part of her wanted to cry, wanted to fall apart and scream at the unfairness of it all, but another part, a part that had been buried for so long, felt a sense of relief. For the first time in her life, Alice was choosing herself. The decision wasn't easy. The emotional tug-of-war was brutal, but it was the right one. Alice had given everything to her family, but now it was time to stop being the one who always carried the burden. It was time for Lucas to face the consequences of his actions. Alice stood in front of the window, watching the rain fall softly against the glass. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions and decisions, and now, as the dust began to settle, she was left with the quiet realization that she had made a choice, one that would change the course of her life forever. She had cut herself off from everything familiar, her son, her past, the life she had once known. In its place, she had begun something new. It was as though the very act of severing ties with Lucas had freed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. For the first time in years, Alice didn't feel weighed down by the constant demands of others. She felt lighter, as though a burden she didn't even realize she was carrying had been lifted. Her new life had begun with a simple decision to make a difference, something that was entirely her own. Alice had always been passionate about helping others, but she had never given herself the chance to truly invest in causes she cared about. That had changed. With a significant portion of her savings, she had established a scholarship fund for underprivileged children, providing them the opportunity for education they otherwise might not have had. The work was fulfilling. She was finally doing something that mattered beyond her family's needs, beyond the confines of her own sacrifice. The smiles on the children's faces when they received their scholarships were enough to make her heart swell. For the first time in her life, Alice felt like she was contributing to something larger than herself. This was her purpose now. But as rewarding as it was, there was a loneliness that crept in. For years, Alice had been surrounded by her family, her husband, her son, and even though the relationships had grown strained, there was always someone to talk to. Now, that wasn't the case. When she returned home from a long day at the foundation, the house felt emptier than ever. The quietness of it was deafening. No longer did she have the company of her husband, who had once shared everything with her, and Lucas, her only son, whose absence had left a void she hadn't realized was so deep. She had given them everything. And now, there was nothing left. She didn't have anyone to call when she felt overwhelmed, no one to share her triumphs or struggles with. The house that had once felt like a home now felt like a tomb, and Alice wasn't sure if it was the house or her heart that had become hollow. It was on one of these nights of loneliness that Alice met Mark. Mark was a volunteer at the foundation, a soft-spoken man in his late 40s who worked quietly behind the scenes to organize events and ensure that the scholarship fund was running smoothly. He was different from the people Alice had known. He wasn't seeking anything from her, didn't want anything in return for the work he did. His kindness was genuine, and he seemed to understand her in ways no one else did. Over the course of the weeks, Alice found herself drawn to Mark. His gentle demeanor and the way he genuinely cared about the children they helped touched her heart in a way she hadn't expected. It had been so long since she had felt truly seen. Mark seemed to recognize her for who she was, not as a mother or a wife or someone who was constantly giving, but as a person, a woman who had her own desires, her own dreams. It was a strange feeling, one she hadn't experienced in years. She began to look forward to their conversations, the moments they shared working together. There was a warmth in his presence, something that made her feel cared for, protected. For the first time since David's death, Alice felt like someone wanted to take care of her. But just as Alice was beginning to open up to this new possibility, Megan showed up again. It happened on a Friday afternoon when Alice was reviewing some documents at the foundation's office. Megan appeared at the door, her face full of frustration and anger. Alice hadn't seen her in weeks, not since the phone call that had ended their conversation so abruptly. But now, Megan's presence was like a shadow cast over everything Alice had worked so hard to build. "Megan, what are you doing here?" Alice asked, her voice wary. She wasn't in the mood for more emotional manipulation. Megan stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes darting around the room as though she were looking for something. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice tight. "I'm not sure we have anything left to talk about," Alice replied, standing up and crossing her arms. "You've made it very clear where you and Lucas stand." Megan took a deep breath, her posture defensive. "I know I've been awful. I know you're angry, but I'm asking you to listen. It's Lucas. He's found out that you've taken him out of the will. He's upset, Alice. He feels like you're punishing him for things he's already regretted." Alice felt a flicker of irritation rise within her. So Lucas had sent his wife to do his dirty work. She could almost hear him in the background using Megan to manipulate her again. It was the same tactic he had always used, the guilt trip. But Alice wasn't falling for it this time. "He's been punished by his own actions, Megan," Alice replied coolly. He made his choice when he chose to abandon me. Now it's time for him to face the consequences of that." Megan's eyes filled with frustration. "I understand that, Alice, I do. But Lucas is in a terrible place right now. He's drowning in debt and he doesn't know how to get out of it. He's not asking for your forgiveness, he's asking for your help. Just this once, I'm asking you to think about it." Alice could feel her resolve wavering. There was a part of her that still wanted to believe in her son, that still wanted to believe in the possibility of reconciliation. But then she thought about the life she had lived for him, the years of sacrifice, the hurt, the betrayal. She couldn't go back to that. "You should have thought about that before, Megan," Alice said firmly. "Lucas made his choices. He'll have to deal with the consequences of them." Megan looked at Alice for a long moment as if trying to read her, but Alice stood her ground, refusing to give in. She knew what she had to do, and she wasn't going to let anyone guilt-trip her into changing her mind. Alice sat at her desk, staring blankly at the paperwork in front of her. The quiet hum of the office around her only emphasized the thoughts racing through her mind. It had been weeks since her last conversation with Megan, and the weight of that conversation still hung over her. She had made her decision. She was done. No more enabling Lucas, no more being manipulated by him or anyone else. But just as she had begun to feel some sense of peace, something had shifted. The presence of Mark, the kind, gentle man she had come to rely on, had begun to offer her the comfort and companionship she had longed for. She'd found herself looking forward to his visits to the foundation, to the conversations they shared. There was something about Mark that had drawn her in, his honesty, his quiet strength, the way he seemed to understand her in ways others never did. He was the first person in a long time who made her feel like she could finally trust again. But all of that had changed one afternoon. It had started as a normal day. Mark had come to the office to help organize some of the new scholarship applications, as he often did. They had worked together quietly, exchanging small talk as Alice tried to focus on the growing list of tasks in front of her. She felt an odd sense of comfort in the routine, in the gentle presence of someone who seemed genuinely interested in her work. However, as they were wrapping up, Alice noticed something strange. Mark's phone, which he had left on the desk, began to buzz incessantly. It wasn't unusual for someone to get a call, but the frequency of the messages caught Alice's attention. When she looked closer, she saw a name on the screen that made her heart skip a beat: Lucas Foster. Her mind immediately began to race. Why was Mark in contact with Lucas? Alice hadn't thought much about it before. Mark had never mentioned anything about his relationship with her son. But now, the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. What if Mark wasn't the man he appeared to be? Her instincts screamed at her to ignore it, but Alice's curiosity got the better of her. She had trusted Mark, and now the feeling of betrayal was starting to creep in. Slowly, she picked up the phone and glanced at the messages. The texts were brief, but the content chilled her to the core. Mark was advising Lucas on financial matters, suggesting ways he could fix his situation, suggesting that Lucas should consider asking Alice for more money. Alice's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a coincidence. Mark had known about Lucas's financial issues, likely even before Alice did. He'd been involved with Lucas, possibly even helping him manipulate her for his own gain. Her hands began to shake as she read through the rest of the messages, feeling her heart sink lower with each passing word. It became clear that Mark had been more than just a friendly volunteer. He had been acting as a liaison between her son and herself, feeding Lucas advice and, more disturbingly, keeping him updated on Alice's decisions. The revelation was like a knife to Alice's chest. The man she had started to trust, the one she had let into her life, was not who he seemed. Was everyone around her hiding something? Was she the only one trying to be honest? Trying to make the right choices? In a daze, Alice set the phone back down, trying to steady her breath. Her mind was spinning. Had Mark been using her all along? Had he been manipulating her feelings and her trust for some ulterior motive? She couldn't bear the thought. She had already been burned once by Lucas, and now she was questioning the very person she thought had been her ally. The betrayal hurt more than she expected. How could she have been so blind? She had finally started to open up, to trust again, and now she was left feeling more alone than ever. Alice had always prided herself on her ability to see through people, to understand their intentions. But she had been wrong. Mark had been deceiving her in the same way Lucas had. Her mind raced back to the first time she met Mark. The kindness, the warmth he had shown her. It had felt genuine. But now, she wondered if everything had been an act. What if Mark had been working with Lucas from the start? What if his goal all along had been to use Alice as another way to get to her money? Alice pushed the thoughts away, shaking her head. She couldn't do this again. She couldn't let herself be manipulated, not by Lucas, and not by someone who had pretended to be her friend. But the emotional toll was taking its toll on her. She felt like everyone around her was playing some kind of game, and Alice was the pawn. She stood up from the desk, walking over to the window, looking out at the rainy evening outside. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her. She had trusted so much, given so much, and for what? To be betrayed by the one she loved and thought she could trust. A part of Alice wanted to shut everyone out, to close herself off completely and live the rest of her life in isolation. She had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. But then another part of her, a stronger part, told her that this was the moment she needed to rise above the hurt. She couldn't let herself be consumed by anger or betrayal. She had already given too much to others. Now it was time to take back control. She couldn't let herself be deceived again. It was time for her to make her next move. But this time, Alice would be the one in control. No more blind trust. As she stood there gazing out the window, Alice made a silent vow to herself. She would never again allow herself to be used. She would take charge of her life and face whatever came her way, alone if necessary. Alice paced nervously in her living room, her thoughts swirling. The decision had been made, and she couldn't avoid it any longer. She had to face Lucas, the son she had loved and sacrificed for, the one who had broken her heart in the most unimaginable way. This was the moment that would define everything. Could she find a way to make peace with him, or was it truly over between them? After everything that had happened, his refusal to attend his father's funeral, the lies, the betrayal, Alice had expected herself to be resolute, unshaken. But as the day of the confrontation drew near, doubts crept in. Was she doing the right thing? Could she still salvage anything from the relationship with Lucas? Or was it truly too late? Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Lucas. "Mom, I know things have been hard between us. I want to make it right. Please let me know when we can talk. I need to fix this. I'll be at your place at 3 p.m. today." Alice stared at the message for a long moment, a wave of conflicting emotions crashing over her. He wanted to meet, but for what? Was this truly an apology, or was it another attempt to manipulate her, to take more from her? She hesitated, but then, with a deep breath, typed a simple response. "Come over. We need to talk." The time passed slowly. When the doorbell finally rang, Alice's heart raced. She stood up, took a steadying breath, and opened the door. There, standing in front of her, was Lucas. His familiar face, his posture tense, as though he didn't know what to expect. He looked older, his eyes tired, his suit not as sharp as it once had been. The sight of him brought back so many memories of the little boy she had raised, of the man he had become. She fought back tears, not wanting to give him the satisfaction of seeing her weakness. "Come in, Lucas," Alice said, stepping aside to let him enter. They both sat at the kitchen table, an uncomfortable silence hanging between them. Lucas shifted in his chair, clearly uneasy, his fingers tapping nervously on the surface. "Alice, I know I've hurt you. I'm sorry for everything that's happened. I never meant for it to go this far," Lucas began, his voice almost pleading. "But I'm in a bad place and I need your help, just one last time. I'll pay you back every penny I've borrowed, every dime. I just need your help to get out of this mess, and I swear, things will be different." Alice listened in silence, her emotions a mix of anger and disbelief. He didn't sound remorseful. He sounded desperate, as if he thought she could just fix everything again, like she always had. But not anymore. She had given him everything: money, time, unconditional love. And what had it brought her? Pain, disappointment, betrayal. "I can't do this anymore, Lucas," Alice said, her voice steady. "I've helped you more than I ever should have, and this is where it ends. I'm not going to be your safety net anymore." Lucas looked at her with wide eyes, his mouth opening and closing as though he were searching for the right words, but nothing came. "But Mom, I'm trying to make things right. Please, you've always been there for me. I need you now more than ever." "That's the problem," Alice said, shaking her head. "You've never been there for me. Not when I needed you, not when Dad was sick, and not now. You've taken and taken from me without ever giving anything in return." There was a long pause, and for a brief moment Alice saw a flicker of something in Lucas's eyes. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it had come. Instead, he leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Okay, I get it," Lucas said, his voice suddenly cold. "But I'm not done yet. I'm going to get my share of what's mine, whether you like it or not. You can't just cut me out of everything like this." Alice's heart skipped a beat. Her suspicions were confirmed. This wasn't about making things right. Lucas wasn't trying to rebuild their relationship. He was still trying to manipulate her to get what he felt was owed to him. But before Alice could say anything, the doorbell rang again. This time it was a knock, insistent and firm. Alice's heart raced. Who could it be now? When she opened the door, she was met with an unexpected sight. Megan. She stood there, her face pale and tight with anger, but there was something else in her eyes, a hint of fear. "Alice," Megan began, her voice sharp, "I need to talk to you. This has gone too far." Alice stepped back, unsure of what was coming next. She hadn't seen Megan in weeks, not since their last conversation about Lucas's debts. And yet here she was, walking into her home like it was still hers to control. "What are you doing here, Megan?" Alice asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Megan pushed past her without waiting for an invitation. "This has gone too far," she repeated, her tone now tinged with frustration. "You think you can just shut Lucas out of your life and take everything for yourself? He's my husband, Alice, and you're not going to take away what's rightfully his." Alice's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" Megan's voice rose, her words coming out in a rush. "Lucas is entitled to his share of the inheritance. You can't just take it all for yourself. We'll go to court if we have to, but don't think for a second that you'll get away with this. You're not the only one who's been wronged here, Alice." Alice stared at her, stunned. Megan was no longer apologizing. She was threatening her over the inheritance. It wasn't enough that Lucas had already taken everything she had given. Now Megan was demanding more. Lucas stood behind her, his eyes cold and calculating. Alice felt her stomach twist. This wasn't about family. This was about greed, about getting their hands on what they felt was owed to them. "You're both trying to take from me," Alice said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You've used me long enough. I won't let you do it anymore." And Alice stood in the living room staring at Lucas and Megan, who had just crossed the threshold of her home, their presence like a storm that had rolled in without warning. The anger in her chest was rising, but now it wasn't just the pain of betrayal. It was something much deeper, something harder to ignore. She had been the victim of their lies, their manipulation for far too long. But now everything had changed. Alice Foster was no longer the passive, self-sacrificing woman who had given everything for her family. She was done. She was going to fight back. The moment Megan and Lucas had walked in, Alice knew that their words, no matter how forceful or threatening, were the last acts of desperation from two people who had used her for far too long. And this time, they weren't going to get away with it. "I think you both need a reality check," Alice said, her voice cold, unwavering. She turned toward the hallway and walked into the office, signaling for them to follow. As they entered, Alice's gaze was focused on the papers spread across the desk. It was time for them to see just how wrong they had been about her. "I'm not going to let you push me around anymore," Alice continued, taking a seat at the desk. "You want to make threats? You want to intimidate me into giving you what you feel entitled to? You should have thought about that before you crossed the line." Lucas looked stunned, but it was Megan who responded, her voice dripping with venom. "We're not going to sit here and let you take everything for yourself. This is about fairness, Alice. You don't get to just erase us from your life." Alice's eyes narrowed. "I'm not erasing anyone, Megan. You both have shown me exactly who you are. You think you can take what's mine with threats and manipulation, but that ends now. I've already made the decision, and it's final." Megan opened her mouth to retort, but Alice held up her hand, silencing her. "I've already taken the necessary steps. I've been working with my lawyer to ensure that the inheritance is protected. You can't just waltz in here and act like you're entitled to anything. You'll get nothing. You've already taken enough from me." A silence fell over the room as Lucas and Megan exchanged confused glances. Alice's heart raced, but her determination remained strong. She had taken control of her life once again. "Mark my words," Alice continued, her voice unwavering. "I've taken legal action. I've changed everything. No more will you get to manipulate me. No more will I be the one to foot the bill for your mistakes. This family has been built on sacrifices, but I won't let you destroy it any longer." Lucas opened his mouth to speak, but Alice cut him off. "You've already done enough damage, Lucas. I'm not playing games with you anymore. I've signed everything over to the foundation. You'll get nothing. Nothing." Lucas's face turned pale as the weight of Alice's words sank in. Megan, on the other hand, clenched her fists, her expression shifting between anger and disbelief. Alice could feel her heart beating faster, but she stood tall. This was her moment, her chance to take back everything she had lost. She wasn't just protecting her inheritance, she was reclaiming her dignity, her independence, her life. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Alice," Lucas said, his voice low, "but this isn't fair. We're your family. We deserve more." "Family?" Alice laughed bitterly. "You are family, Lucas, but not the kind I want in my life. You're toxic, both of you, and I'm done." For a moment, Alice saw something in Lucas's eyes, something that looked almost like regret, but it was fleeting. He quickly composed himself, his face hardening. "You'll regret this," he muttered under his breath. "You'll see." As Lucas and Megan turned to leave, Alice could feel a rush of triumph rising within her. She had done it. She had stood up to them, faced her fears, and taken back control of her life. But even as the door closed behind them, she couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. She wasn't naive. This wasn't over. Lucas and Megan would never give up so easily. But for the first time in a long time, Alice didn't feel afraid. She had the power now. The phone buzzed on her desk, and Alice hesitated for a moment before picking it up. It was her lawyer. She'd been expecting this call. "Ms. Foster, we've finalized the paperwork. The legal documents are in place. The foundation now owns the majority of the assets. Your son and daughter-in-law have no claim to anything," the lawyer said, his tone professional. Alice felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you," she said quietly, the weight of her decision lifting. She had done it. She had taken back control, and now, with everything legally secured, she felt stronger than ever before. But as she sat back in her chair, a voice inside her whispered the truth. This was only the beginning. Megan and Lucas would never just accept this defeat. They would fight back. They had to. But Alice was no longer the same woman who had stood by and allowed them to walk all over her. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. She had made the right decision, and she was ready for whatever came next. Alice looked out the window, watching the sky change colors as the sun began to set. The storm had passed. Now, all she had to do was rebuild, and she would do it on her terms. No one else would ever dictate her life again. Alice sat at her desk, the weight of her decisions finally beginning to settle on her shoulders. The paperwork was done. The legal documents had been finalized. Lucas and Megan were officially cut out of the will. There would be no more demands, no more manipulation, no more empty promises. The assets she had worked so hard to build over the years, the wealth she had accumulated from decades of sacrifice, would now serve a higher purpose: to help others. It had been a long process. The meetings with her lawyer, the endless decisions about how to divide her estate, what to do with the house, everything had been difficult. But now, sitting in the quiet of her office, Alice felt a strange sense of calm. She was no longer the woman who had been taken for granted, who had been used and discarded. She had taken back control. And for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with herself. Her thoughts turned to the house, the one she and David had built together, the home where they had raised Lucas. It had been a place of memories, of laughter, of love. But now it felt empty, like a relic of a life that no longer existed. David was gone, and Lucas had made it clear that he had no interest in being part of the family anymore. Alice had decided that it was time to pass the house on, to give it to someone who would appreciate it, someone who could make it their home. She picked up the phone and dialed the real estate agent who had been helping her with the sale of the property. "I've made my decision," Alice said, her voice firm. "I want the house to go to a deserving family. I don't want to sell it. I want to donate it." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Are you sure about this, Ms. Foster?" the agent asked, his voice cautious. "Yes," Alice replied without hesitation. "I want it to be a family in need. A family who will make it their home, just as it was mine." As the agent made the arrangements, Alice's thoughts drifted to the future. She had already set up a scholarship fund to help underprivileged children, but now she was thinking bigger, much bigger. She wanted to use her wealth to create something lasting, something that would honor David's memory and provide opportunities for others who had been dealt a bad hand in life. She began drafting plans for a community center, a place where people could come together, learn, and build better lives. It would be a hub for education, a sanctuary for those in need of a second chance. Alice felt a deep sense of purpose as she thought about how her money would help those who needed it most. She was no longer just a mother or a widow, she was a force for good. Her life had meaning again. Just as she was beginning to feel a sense of fulfillment, her phone rang. It was an unexpected call, a number she didn't recognize. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she answered. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "Alice, it's Megan." Her voice was strained, desperate. "I need to talk to you." Alice felt her stomach tighten. She had been expecting this. Despite everything, Megan was trying once again to manipulate her, to get something from her. But Alice wasn't having it. "Megan, I've made my decision," Alice said firmly. "There's nothing more to discuss. You and Lucas are no longer part of my life, and that's final." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. When Megan spoke again, her tone was different. Desperate, almost pleading. "I understand, Alice, but you need to know something. Lucas and I are being shut out. We've been cut off from all our friends, from the people who matter. We've been ostracized. People are talking. We can't survive without your help. We need you." Alice's breath caught in her throat. What was Megan saying? She had never heard desperation in her voice before, never heard her admit weakness. This wasn't the Megan Alice had known, the woman who had stood beside Lucas, enabling his every mistake. This was something different. "Why should I help you, Megan?" Alice asked, her voice cold. "You've betrayed me, manipulated me, and used me for years. You and Lucas have taken everything I had, and now you want me to fix everything again?" "I never meant for things to go this far," Megan said quickly, her voice softening. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Alice. But please, you don't understand. Lucas is lost without you. He needs you. I need you." Alice felt a surge of conflicting emotions. She didn't know if Megan was being sincere or if this was just another ploy to manipulate her. But something about the desperation in her voice made Alice pause. For a moment, she found herself wondering if there was any truth in what Megan was saying. "You've made your bed, Megan," Alice said slowly. "And now you and Lucas are going to have to lie in it. I won't be the one to fix everything for you. I can't keep sacrificing myself for people who don't value me." But as the words left her mouth, Alice felt something shift inside her. The pain, the guilt, the overwhelming feeling of betrayal. It was all still there. But this time, Alice was standing tall. She wasn't going to let them drag her down again. She wasn't going to let their mistakes become her responsibility. "Goodbye, Megan," Alice said, her voice final. "I've made my choice." As she hung up the phone, a strange sense of calm washed over her. She had done what she needed to do. She had given Lucas and Megan every chance, and they had squandered it. Now it was time to move forward. Her decision was final. The house would go to a family who needed it. Her wealth would serve a greater purpose, and the foundation she had built in David's memory would continue to thrive. Alice had come to terms with her past and was finally ready to embrace the future. She was no longer just a mother or a widow. She was a woman in control of her destiny. Alice sat by the window, the early morning sunlight casting a warm glow over her as she sipped her coffee. It had been a few days since her last conversation with Megan, and in that time, she had done everything in her power to block out the noise. She had spent her life trying to make everyone else happy, trying to fix their problems, and now, for the first time, she was finally free. She had made the choice to stand up for herself, to protect her future, and the future of the children she now dedicated her time to helping through her foundation. But as the days passed, a question kept gnawing at her. Could she really cut ties with her son completely? Could she really turn her back on Lucas, the boy she had raised, the boy who had once clung to her in need of protection and love? It wasn't the first time Alice had questioned herself, but this time it felt different. She wasn't just dealing with the selfish actions of her son. She was grappling with her own heart. Was it right to let him go completely? Was she justified in severing ties with the man he had become, or was there still a chance for him to redeem himself? Just as Alice was lost in these thoughts, the doorbell rang. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure if she was ready to face them, Lucas and Megan. She hesitated for a moment, but then, with a deep breath, Alice stood up and walked toward the door. When she opened it, there they were, Lucas and Megan standing together on her doorstep. They looked different, almost vulnerable, like two people who had been through something painful. Their expressions were sober, no longer defiant or angry, but filled with something Alice hadn't seen in a long time: regret. "Mom, we need to talk," Lucas said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Megan, standing just behind him, glanced up at Alice, her face marked with the lines of worry. "We've come to apologize," she added. "We've made so many mistakes, and we know we've hurt you. But we're asking for a chance to make things right, just a chance to start over." Alice felt a knot tighten in her chest. The two people who had used her, manipulated her, were standing here, asking for forgiveness. It was surreal, almost as if she were in a dream. She hadn't expected this, not after everything that had happened. They were the last people she thought would come back to her asking for another chance, yet here they were. Lucas spoke first, his eyes cast downward, clearly ashamed. "I've realized how much I've taken from you, and I can't go on pretending that everything I did was okay. I've hurt you more than I can ever express, but I want to make it right. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need you to know that I'm truly sorry." Alice's heart twisted at the sight of her son standing before her, this man who had once been her world, now broken and contrite. She wanted to feel the same warmth she once had for him, but there was something about his words that didn't fully reach her. Was it because they were too late? Was it because the pain he had caused her was too deep to heal with a simple apology? Megan stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Please, Alice, we're not asking for your money. We're not asking for anything but a chance. A chance to rebuild the relationship we had, even if it's not the same. We're willing to work hard for it. Please, just give us a chance." Alice stood frozen for a moment, torn between the love she once felt for her son and the betrayal that had left her heartbroken. She looked at them, both of them, standing before her as if they were truly remorseful. But could she believe them? Her mind flashed back to everything that had happened, the years of sacrifice, the lies, the manipulations. It was hard to forget, hard to look at them and pretend that everything could just go back to the way it was. But there was something else stirring inside her, something she hadn't expected to feel, a flicker of hope. Could there be a chance for reconciliation? Could she forgive them and rebuild the family she had once dreamed of? The choice was hers. Alice knew that this was a decision she couldn't make lightly. She had spent so many years giving, forgiving, hoping for change, but she also knew that she couldn't allow herself to be taken advantage of again. She had already given so much, and now she had to protect herself. "I need to think about it," Alice said finally, her voice low. "You've hurt me, Lucas, and I've spent so long trying to fix things for you, for all of you, but I'm not sure if I can keep doing that. You've taken so much from me." Megan's face softened, her eyes pleading. "I understand," she said quietly. "We've hurt you in ways that are hard to fix, but we're willing to do whatever it takes. Please, just give us that chance." Alice stepped back, closing the door slowly behind her. Her heart was heavy, her mind racing. Could she forgive them? Could she give them another chance? She didn't know. She didn't know if she was strong enough to face the consequences of either decision. The reality was that she had already made the decision to walk away from them. She had already made the choice to cut ties and build a new life, one where she wasn't tied to the people who had caused her so much pain. But now, standing in front of them, she realized just how much that decision weighed on her. Would forgiveness heal her wounds, or would it open them up again? Would giving them another chance just lead to more heartbreak? Alice didn't know. She didn't know what was the right choice, and that terrified her. Alice stood at the edge of the community garden, the morning sun rising slowly over the horizon, casting a golden light over the work she had been doing. She watched as volunteers, some of them children she had helped through her scholarship fund, planted new flowers and vegetables, bringing life to a space that had once been neglected. This garden wasn't just a patch of land, it was a symbol of everything Alice had worked for, a tangible reminder of her decision to help others, to leave behind a legacy that would outlive her personal heartbreaks. Over the past several months, Alice had immersed herself in the work of her foundation. The feeling of giving, of helping people find hope and opportunity, filled her in ways she hadn't expected. She was no longer burdened by the weight of her past, no longer weighed down by the people who had used her. The foundation had given her a purpose that was far greater than anything she had ever known. Helping children, offering scholarships to those who needed it most, was what kept her going now. It was a fresh start, a new life that was entirely hers to build. For the first time in years, Alice felt free. Free from the manipulations of her son, free from the shadow of the life she had once known. Her sacrifices had all led to this moment, a moment of self-realization, where she could finally live for herself. But as fulfilling as it was, there was still something missing. As much as Alice had poured herself into her work, there were moments, quiet moments when the work slowed down, when she was alone, that a small part of her wished for reconciliation. She had made her peace with Lucas's betrayal, but the question of whether it was truly the end lingered in the back of her mind. Could there still be a chance for them to rebuild their relationship, or had that door been permanently closed? It was during one of those moments of reflection that her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Lucas. Her heart skipped a beat. It had been weeks since they had last spoken. She had avoided his calls for months, knowing that every conversation would only bring more heartache, more disappointment. But now, for some reason, this felt different. The uncertainty, the fear that had once paralyzed her was no longer present. Maybe because, deep down, Alice had changed too. She wasn't the same woman who had tolerated so much pain for the sake of others. With a steadying breath, Alice answered the call. "Hello," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Mom, it's Lucas," came the hesitant voice on the other end. "I know you've probably heard all the excuses by now, and I'm sure you don't want to hear them again, but I need to talk to you." Alice was silent for a moment, unsure of what to say. What was Lucas asking now? Was it more of the same? A plea for help, an attempt to manipulate her into giving him another chance? But then his voice softened. "I'm not asking for money. And I'm not asking for anything from you. I just need to say I'm sorry. I know I've messed up. I've been trying to fix things on my own, and I don't want to ask anything from you except for your understanding." Alice's heart tightened. There was a sincerity in his voice, a raw honesty she hadn't heard in years. She had expected Lucas to come back to her, but this was different. This time there was no arrogance, no entitlement. For the first time, he was taking responsibility for his actions. "I'm listening," Alice said slowly. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to describe, but I want you to know that I've changed," Lucas continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I've been working on myself, on becoming a better person. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm trying. I really am. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, and I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for me." Alice listened intently, the weight of his words sinking in. Was this the same man who had abandoned her when she needed him most? The same man who had made selfish decisions time and time again? For a brief moment, Alice questioned whether she was dreaming, whether this was some trick, but something told her that this was real. Lucas wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't manipulating her. He was just apologizing. "I've started going to therapy," Lucas continued, "and I'm getting help. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I know I can't change the past. All I can do is try to make things right from here on out." Alice felt tears well up in her eyes. She hadn't realized how much she had longed for this moment. The apology, the acknowledgement of his wrongs, the promise of change. For so long, she had been angry, bitter, holding on to the pain, but now, as she listened to Lucas speak, she felt something shift within her. The weight of years of disappointment seemed to lift, replaced by a faint glimmer of hope. "I'm proud of you for taking responsibility, Lucas," Alice said softly, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm proud of the man you're becoming, but understand this. No one can fix what's broken except you. I've done my part, and now it's your turn." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Alice could hear Lucas breathing, as if he were processing her words. "I know, Mom," he finally said. "I know. I'm going to keep working on it. And one day, if you're ready, I'd like to try to rebuild our relationship." For the first time in a long time, Alice smiled. She wasn't ready to forgive him completely, not yet. But the door was no longer closed. Lucas had taken the first step toward healing. "I'll be here when you're ready," Alice said, her voice full of quiet strength. "Take your time. I'll be waiting." As Alice ended the call, a sense of peace washed over her. She had waited so long for this moment, and though it wasn't the end of the journey, it was a new beginning, one where forgiveness could flourish, where healing was possible. In that moment, Alice realized that the past no longer had the power to control her future. She had found herself again, not just as a mother, but as a woman capable of change, of growth. She had healed, and now she was ready to live again. Alice sat by the window of her new apartment, watching the golden hues of sunset stretch across the skyline. She had always loved this time of day, when the world seemed to slow down and everything appeared calmer. But today, there was a sense of peace that came from deep within. She had made it through the storm. After all the heartbreak, betrayal, and personal battles, she had finally arrived at a place where she could breathe freely. The weight of the past no longer pressed on her chest. It had taken a long time for Alice to come to terms with what had happened with Lucas and Megan. The anger, the sadness, the sense of abandonment, all of it had consumed her for so long. But now, those feelings had faded, replaced by a quiet strength. Alice had finally realized that she couldn't change the past no matter how much she wished to. What mattered now was the future, and the life she was going to build for herself. Her foundation had continued to grow. The scholarship fund she had set up was helping dozens of children pursue their dreams of higher education, just as she had always hoped. She had found a new purpose, one that was hers and hers alone. Alice felt her heart swelling with pride every time she received a thank you note from a student who had benefited from the scholarship. These children, many of whom had come from difficult backgrounds, were now on their way to creating better lives for themselves, and Alice had played a part in that. It was more rewarding than she could have imagined, yet there were moments when Alice still felt a pang of sadness. She would never forget the years spent with David, the years spent trying to make Lucas proud, the years of sacrificing everything for those she loved. But she knew now that her role in their lives had to come to an end, at least for now. She couldn't keep holding on to something that no longer served her well-being. Alice had realized that it was time for her to truly live, not just for others, but for herself. She had poured so much of her life into everyone else that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to care for her own heart, her own dreams. She began to explore things she had always wanted to do, things she had put off for years because her focus had always been on others. She enrolled in an art class and rediscovered her love for painting, something she hadn't done in over a decade. She began to travel, visiting places that had always been on her list but that she had never gotten around to seeing. Each new experience was a small victory, a step toward embracing the freedom she had fought so hard to achieve. Her relationship with Lucas was still a work in progress. They had talked a few times since their last conversation, and although the tension hadn't completely lifted, there was a tentative understanding between them now. Lucas had been going to therapy, and Alice could hear the change in his voice when they spoke. It wasn't an easy road for either of them, but Alice knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where trust would have to be rebuilt, but where there was also a possibility for reconciliation. She wasn't ready to fully open her heart to him again, but she was no longer holding on to the anger that had kept her from moving forward. One afternoon, while walking through a park near her apartment, Alice ran into Mark. It had been months since they had last spoken, and she had thought about him often, wondering what had become of him. He was still working with the foundation, but she hadn't had much contact with him since the last time they had spoken. The emotions she had felt toward him were complicated. She had trusted him, only to find out that he had been involved with Lucas in ways that had shaken her. But as she saw him now, standing across from her, she noticed that he looked different. He looked genuinely happy, peaceful, almost like the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. "Hi, Alice," Mark said, his voice warm but uncertain. "It's been a while." Alice nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It has. I didn't expect to run into you here." "I know," Mark said, his expression serious. "I've been meaning to reach out to you. I just didn't know if I should. I wanted to apologize for everything, for not being upfront with you about my involvement with Lucas. You were right to be upset with me. I should have been honest with you from the beginning." Alice looked at him, taking in the sincerity of his words. She hadn't expected an apology from him, especially not after everything that had happened. But as he spoke, Alice felt something shift within her. Forgiveness didn't mean excusing the past. It meant letting go of the power it held over her. "I appreciate you saying that," Alice replied softly. "I've had a lot to work through myself, but I've learned that holding on to anger doesn't help anyone. Not me, not you, not Lucas. I've been trying to let go of all that." Mark nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. I've been doing some work on myself, too. I've realized a lot of things about how I handled everything. I wasn't the person I thought I was." Alice met his gaze, the weight of the conversation sinking in. "We all have our pasts. I guess it's how we deal with them that matters." Mark smiled, a sense of relief in his eyes. "I'm glad you found peace, Alice. You deserve it." For the first time in a long time, Alice felt like she could look forward without the burden of the past hanging over her. She had come a long way, and she was proud of the woman she had become. She had faced her fears, her losses, and her regrets, and now she was free to live the life she wanted. As Alice continued her walk through the park, she felt the weight of her decision to move on. It hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. She was ready for the future. A future that didn't depend on the mistakes of her past, a future where she could finally live for herself and for the people she chose to help. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was finally home.